You're listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks, a biblical, practical, and spiritual conversation about living and leading worship. Today's episode is brought to you by PraiseCharts. Worship leaders and pastors, are you looking for the best new worship songs to introduce to your church? From Phil Wickham to Elevation, Passion, and Maverick City, PraiseCharts has the latest ready to go. Whether you need chord charts, lead sheets, or full orchestrations, everything is formatted for your team and available for instant download. Stay current, save time, and lead with confidence. Check out PraiseCharts.com today and get your hands on the freshest songs for Sunday.
Well, hey, thanks so much for listening to the Worshipology podcast. This is a biblical, practical, and spiritual conversation all about living and leading worship. And today I have the CEO of PraiseCharts.com. We've got Ryan Dahl on the podcast. Say what's up, man.
Wow, so great to be here and fascinated by this entire podcast. All the people, I was just telling you, I'm rather intimidated by the people that precede me on this podcast, but we'll see where this goes.
No, I'm so excited to have somebody that's in your seat. And, you know, obviously PraiseCharts is such a great and valuable resource for churches all over the place, not just for Sunday mornings, but for so much more than that. And man, Ryan, just for our listeners who may be unfamiliar with you and PraiseCharts, why don't you share just a little bit of your story? Like, how did you get started in this whole thing, and really what made you launch PraiseCharts?
Well, if I look back, I'm turning 55 in a couple of months. So I've been around for a little while. I'm not a young guy anymore, but I definitely started this whole journey when I was young, 28 years old, 1998. So we're into our, 26th, 27th year. But really, the heart of PraiseCharts goes back into the early 90s. Kind of fun fact, I'm also co-hosting right now a podcast called the 90s Worship Podcast. I'm fascinated by all the music that came out of the 90s. And we just interviewed a guy this morning on one of my shows. Anyways, but if you're asking where does the heart of PraiseCharts come, I mean, I think we all got to look way back into our lives. There's probably some hint when you were 4 or 5 or 3 or 6 years old that is like a little window into who you are today. And for me, the picture I would say is I just was fascinated by what is on the backside of those black music stands that are on a stage when a band is performing. And in fact, so fascinated that when shows would end, my parents would take me to various shows or you know, whatever. And everyone would be filing out the back, going out the back. And I would be like a fish swimming upstream, wanting to get close to the stage. And sometimes I was bold or obnoxious enough to crawl onto the stage and take a peek behind that black piece of metal, answering the question, what is making all of this happen? So I know it's very unspiritual, but it's very practical like that I'm just fascinated by the concept of music and how music can, you know, then the other layer that brings it together, and this is what I've discovered after 55 years of life, is I really like people and seeing people come together. So I have seen how little black notes on a piece of white paper, when it all breaks down at the end of the day and you put it together with worship music, it brings people together. And I could tell you story after story of other ways in my life that I like to spend my time finding ways to bring people together. And then I just kind of light up when I see it happen. I mean, it happened just as recent as last week. I was in West Virginia, of all places. Yeah, and I was at a music publishers conference. Could be one of the most stuffy, corporate, awkward types of conferences you could ever go to. A bunch of, you know, CEOs and executives of these big publishing companies that cover all the songs that we administer. And I love to run the cornhole tournament for these guys. And I watch as they operate in my little tournament that I've designed this system, and they start lighting up and high-fiving and having fun and laughing and cracking jokes. And it's just like the greatest joy for me. So there is a parallel there, but at the end of the day, it's like, it's about people. And so, anyways, going from when I was
I gotta
5
ask
years
this
old.
because I see a couple guitars in the background. So are you a musician yourself? Like not just on the front side of the stage, but on the stage yourself? Like, because there's got to be that tie-in with worship and music that I'm sure you weren't just an onlooker, right?
No. I mean, I'm the first customer of PraiseCharts. And to this day, every time I lead worship, I am inside my site looking at the music. I edit and make all the chord charts, or not all of them, but many of them. I still like dig right into I just love it. Wow. I love the notes. Wow. I work with my arrangers and producers and transcribers, and I love music. I'm not a great musician. I'm a pretty good piano player. I mostly lead worship from the piano now. I think I'm on in my church in a couple of weeks. I used to be the worship pastor at the church where I'm at right now, and then that kind of grew into a season where I moved on and just did PraiseCharts full time. But now I'm just back at the church, just as a volunteer. Like just put me on. I'm in planning center just like any other person. When my time comes up, I get on stage. I love picking out songs and working with the band and playing, some of these instruments. If you're just listening, you can't see them, but some of them are like my dad's old guitars, or there's like history to some of them. He was a bit of a collector and creates a bit of ambiance in my music space. But anyways, I was just going to say that moving on from when I was 5 and transcribing all the way through my teenage years, I took piano lessons and then got tired of just only knowing how to read music and not knowing how to play from my heart. And I wanted to learn to play by ear. So I transitioned into very intentionally trying to learn to play by ear. And that unlocked a whole new world, which eventually transitioned into leading worship. Because for the most part, if you're going to be a worship leader, you can't be staring at the notes on a page while you're leading in worship. You've got to figure out. And it's an interesting thing about PraiseCharts is when I do seminars sometimes at worship conferences, I will teach. I have this one seminar I've created that's all about how to get your eyes off the page, how to not need any of the music in PraiseCharts when you lead worship, which is kind of the great irony of the guy that's selling music. And then if I'm going to teach you something, I want to teach you how to not need it.
Give us a little snapshot into that seminar, because that sounds so interesting.
Well, even if you would look, for example, at the chord charts that we make, the intentionality of musical phrasing and lyrical phrasing, so that you can start to see patterns. I talk a lot about patterns in music, like 1-4-5-1, and a lot of times a modern song that we have. If you break it down into its repeatable sections, you can literally fit an entire 6-page song onto one page, and sometimes onto 3 or 4 lines. And I actually designed this whole chart system called Stage Charts in PraiseCharts. They're all free, but I've broken all these songs that we love to sing down into their most essential parts. And then once you start to see music in terms of patterns, and not just melodic lines that will go for 100 bars, but it's actually 2 sets of 6 bars on repeat with one variation at the end. That's how music is made. And once you can internalize that, then you can get free from the music, because you're reading patterns in your head instead of reading notes on the page. So that's
so good.
Fascination of mine. But then honestly, I mean, of course I love PraiseCharts, and even the piano notes or the sheet music, the melody, the hooks, the lyrics, everything, to be able to go into the music, see how it's made, then internalize the specific characteristics of a song, and then also understand the patterns that are in it, and then be able to go on stage and lead worship, and then have this element of freedom where at the end of the song, you're not stuck with exactly what was prescribed to you. You can actually become a human being. Go figure this, that you're not just a karaoke singer. You're actually a real human being in front of people, responding to the moment of the stage and the service and all of that. So,
dude, I was literally just having a conversation with one of our volunteers this weekend, because they had just started playing on the team, and they're like, I'm always looking down at my chord chart. How do I, kind of look up and engage with the congregation? Because that is such a vital part of being a worship team. It's not just playing through songs, but really connecting with the people of God as you're leading them in worship. And, it's such a key part of like getting your eyes off of the chart and getting them up, or, focusing your heart and mind and soul, everything you are on Christ as you're worshiping him. And I got to ask you this, like, were you kind of in the world of like classical music, and then you kind of came into this more contemporary world of music where you're kind of balancing the sheet music from, classical songs, and of course, you're listening on audio, but I've got, some sheet music behind me of the old hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness. And
totally.
I was raised on, classical lessons. I grew up taking piano lessons and learning, Beethoven and Rachmaninoff and all the Bach cantatas and stuff. And then of course, when you start leading worship, I was probably around 14 or 15 years old, and you've got, what was it, the old school projector up there with just the lyrics on the side wall, and you're going off of chord charts that you have markered the chords above the words. It's like such a different world than sheet music. But do you have some of that in your background as well, where you're kind of diving into the classical side?
Yeah, I think in Canada, I don't know if it's like this in America, but we have something called the Royal Conservatory of Music. So it's like a series of graded, you can go up to grade 10 and then get your performer's degree and all that. I went up to grade 8, which is basically I was doing it until I was 16 years old. And then the transition for me was through jazz. So I just became fascinated by the jazz chordings and the flat ninths and the 13ths and, things like different things that weren't on the page. And so I specifically hired a jazz pianist to sit with me, or my parents did, when I was 16 years old. But here's an interesting thing. When I went to classical piano lessons, I would be sitting at the piano regurgitating the things that I had memorized, and then they would commentate on that. That was what my piano lessons looked like. When I went to jazz piano lessons, I sat on the sidelines. My jazz piano teacher would take Amazing Grace and go on it for about 30 minutes, and I would just watch and soak it in, and I would record, and then I would go home, and I'm getting shivers as I'm telling you this right now, because it was like he was inspiring me to like wander around the outer edges of the piano, to do, make mistakes, to play things that whatever. And specifically, he took the song Amazing Grace and just transformed that into something that I just played over and over and over, and just loved the richness of the chords. And that kind of just unlocked a world for me of connecting my heart to playing piano in particular became like almost like a fingerprint expression of myself. I'd come home late at night, I'd light candles on my piano, my parents would be sleeping, on the floor above, and I would just start to wander around the piano. And instead of my parents coming down and saying, Ryan, it's 12:30 at night, we're trying to go to sleep, could you please not play right now? They would just let this young teenager play. And I was, unlocking my soul. I was dealing with, I had social anxiety type of things. I was a lonely kid. Hard making for all the social challenges of that. And I was wrestling through that, through the expression of music, maybe like David used to do, I think that's what he was doing. So, but it's like notes on a page of a song that someone else has written can only get you so far. Eventually you have to like go, what is my song? What is my voice? And I have a very particular like personality when I play certain notes, certain shapes. Hopefully you or anyone listening here, you'd be like, we all have that. It's a fingerprint. So I'm pretty passionate about
That's so cool.
that.
What would you tell the listener that's trying to figure out and discover their unique fingerprint because that's such a key thing, right? And especially in worship, you know, you look at Psalm 33, verse 3, David says, sing a new song to the Lord. I think it's 6 times throughout the book of Psalms. Sing a new song to the Lord. How do you discover that, Ryan? Especially in the context of worship music, when you usually are leading and playing songs that other people have written. How do you incorporate your heart and your fingerprint into that worship?
Well, I would say this is when I go to the piano and I start playing something, and then quite quickly I could be self-critical and think, well, this isn't new. This is just a 1, 6, 4, 5, 1. Now, if you don't know numbers, that might not make sense, but that's just a chord progression that's very common. And the reality is, there's not that many brand new things, you know, in the core structure of music. This is why we like music, because it follows certain patterns. What I'm trying to say is that you need to understand those basic, simple patterns or rhythms, that 90% of the songs in praise charts follow the same things. And so many songs that you would come to love are just a 1, 4, 1, 5, 6, 1 on repeat, some variation of that. But then there's something special about every song. There's something that makes a song unique, right? And so I think this is what I would like to say to you is, if you just took something simple in its foundation and then just play around the edges of that, that's where you're going to find your own fingerprints. So I am not I'm not a master musician. I could not play a concerto, or I don't know. I couldn't perform very well, but I know how to use the simplicity of some open chords, and then somehow I've just stumbled upon some, you know, added 6th or 9th or 11th or something like that. And sometimes I will do this even in a church service, and I'll be like, I don't know where that came from, but man, that was a beautiful chord. And I'll have band members. I can picture times when the bass player would look over me in my eye, and we'll sort of catch an eye, and we'll both know it's like, wow, what is happening right now? And it's not that complex, but you have to allow yourself to explore and try. And so, the two things. The one for sure is it's based on a fairly repeatable, simple core foundation. You need to understand, you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of chords. To know what that means. If you don't know what that means, go find out, because that's the core. And then sit, light a candle, turn the lights off, and see where your heart goes. I guess that's what I would say, right? So
I love it, man. Okay, so you know you're developing this love and this passion for music, both on the side of developing charts and on the side of actually playing. Where did you get to the point where it's okay, you know, were you seeing a gap in the resource world where it's okay, I think we might be able to fill this gap with something called praise charts? How did it come about where you saw the need? And then what were those first early years like, Ryan, as you're stepping into this world of creating resources for worship teams and leaders?
Right. Well, it goes back to 1990. It's me, college and career. We're going to church. We got 6 guitars in a circle of 8 people. We're all learning these new songs. Refiner's Fire, Open the Eyes of My Heart, Lord. And I don't know, Come Let Us Worship and Bow Down. I mean, this is 90s worship was playing out in front of my life. And my guitar was full of napkins and scrap pieces of paper all over the place. This is how it was back in the days. You had your guitar, and then on top of the strings on the guitar was a smattering of sheets that were just penned out of this chord and that chord and this lyric. It was a mess, but we were just discovering these songs. And so what happened is in 1992, I thought to myself, enough of this. We got to collect some of these songs together. So I literally wrote a songbook, 250 pages. I called the songbook Sun Rain. I made copies of it, probably semi-illegally. I just was CCLI had just come out. I was trying to harness the power of CCLI. And that songbook actually made its way across Canada. Various camps, youth groups, different churches picked it up, because there was nothing else kind of like it. I still have a lingering 1 copy of it somewhere. Anyways, today the company that oversees Praise Charts is called Sunrain Media, which harkens back to that songbook, Sunrain,
Wow.
Sonreign. And so, anyway, 6 years after that, then this heartbeat, this, I don't know, this germinating seed in me that goes back to when I was 5 years old, and then, continued when I was 20. And then it was almost like when a seed is planted in the ground, and if it's watered, it has to come out. It
Yeah.
has to get to the
Yeah.
surface. And I just could not hold it back. That's how I felt in
Wow.
1998. When I was a worship pastor, I had a little orchestra in my church. I had sheet music all over my desk and overhead projector screens and transparencies, all that 90s stuff. And eventually, there's other layers to my story where, personally in my marriage and family, all the wrestles of just trying to figure out young 20s life.
Yeah.
And so I resigned from my full-time position in the church, but stayed at the church as just a supporting worship leader, kind of like what I am right now, because I didn't want to leave the church. I just didn't fit the mold of the worship pastor as it was in those days. There was too many other factors that were crushing in on me. So I took a risk. I had two kids, 2 and 1 year old, and I let it quit my job, and it's I'm gonna pursue this thing that I love. And I have no idea. I wasn't trained in business, not a part of the music industry. I don't know anyone. And technology was just starting. We barely had email addresses. The fax machines were common in those days. I was but then I discovered, oh, I think I'm kind of an inventor. I didn't know that about myself, but I'm a problem solver. I'm a hacker. I'm a let's figure it out person. And so we started Praise Charts almost just to serve my own self. And then it became something to extend to other people. And then I got confronted with, copyright realities of okay, we need to do this legally. I wanted to do it legally. And then you start butting up against this music industry that's kind of going pretty okay, and not too intimidated by some little young buck in, British Columbia who wants to start a sheet music company. It's yeah, whatever, whatever, so sure, we'll give him permission. But I kept at it for 12, 14, 20 years. About 8 or 10 years in, they started to take notice, and I had to go through the fire where, they were kind of not wanting me to take over and sort of disrupt their very stable business.
Wow.
Because it was all based in sheet music and catalog and ordering, and, there was a whole system the way it goes. And I was pure internet, and I don't know, it was just I was bucking the system in some ways. And that's not always so friendly, but I mean,
what would you say would be the main differentiator in those early days? As you're realizing, okay, this might be a disruptor. What was it that was kind of differentiating Praise Charts from the norm that was out there at that time?
Well, I think the biggest thing was songs were starting to be written so quickly that people wanted to sing the songs before the publishing industry was catching up. So specific songs like Shout to the Lord and Open the Eyes of My Heart. Shout to the Lord was the big song that came right after a major book of songs that I had got my hands on. It had 250 songs. I played through 100 of them that I wanted to do in my church. And then this one song came out that I was I need to sing that song. We need to be, I see what is happening in a church when they sing this song. It's at another level. And Refiner's Fire, some of the early Vineyard music as well. And there was no sheet music for it. There was no mechanism to keep up. And I didn't want to wait 6 weeks. I wanted it next Sunday kind of thing. So the major disruption of Praise Charts became you can have it as fast as you can think of it. If you can hear the song on the radio and next week it's there. that's what I was pursuing, that kind of like speed to market, if you want to use a business. And the music publishing industry wasn't used to that kind of pace because there wasn't technology designed to keep up with it. And so I just kind of went after that, like real time. An image I like to think of in PraiseCharts is we're like a river. It's just there's constant water flowing down the mountain. And I want to take worship pastors with an empty cup and just go dip in the river and get some fresh water. And then there's kind of like a reservoir too of all the river flows into this reservoir. So you can still get the hymns and the old classics and songs that have been around, but there's something new and something fresh. And this is, again, back to the whole 90s worship. It was a whole era where those of us who were in worship ministries were catching on to this fresh thing, that this new music, this new song that had never quite been experienced in such a fresh way as it now was in the 90s, when the internet and phone and cell phones, just technology was opening up the world. And then also you had the vineyard movement was coming up and kind of unlocking music into, just three chords on a guitar, learning these patterns and then Hosanna Integrity. I just finished an interview with a guy who released his album in the 90s, and we were just talking about that, like, hunger for God's presence. And I don't know, it was just something different was happening. And that's kind of a foundation now that I like to think our modern worship that we exist in right now, we need to see that we sit on a foundation of people that were breaking open, like the Don Moens and Paul Baloches and, Lenny LeBlanc. And these are like people that were breaking open a new way. PraiseCharts just grew right out of that garden. That was where we were. So, yeah.
Wow. Talk to me a little bit about like what you've seen from like those early days of worship, really where this river started to flow at a unprecedented pace. And then talk about like, okay, let's say 1995 to 2000, all the way up until today, 2025.
Yeah.
What is like the giant shifts that you've seen as somebody who's kind of been transcribing and working on the back end behind the scenes on a lot of these songs and charts? Like we have this super radio friendly worship style right now that's everywhere. It's, you got worship songs and TV shows right now, which is just wild. So I think I saw something on American Idol that a lot of the songs they're doing right now are straight out of our worship chorus book, so it's like, it's just pretty wild to kind of see the journey from your lens and your seat. What have you seen that have been some of the biggest shifts in the worship movement over these last 30 or so years?
Well, what I see is I'm going to have to use the word industry, and industry meaning there is an industry. There's a worship industry, like whether you like it or not. There are artists and songwriters and publishers. They all get paid processing all of this music. There's two kind of primary industries running in parallel. There is the listening, the passive industry, which is I listen on Spotify, I listen on the radio, I'm taking it in, I'm driving down the highway, I want to listen to music. That's been around since the age of records, But then what has also developed is the church, the experiential. Now I'm not just listening, but I'm actually participating. And that's, if you want to call it another industry, it's, are the churches, am I writing songs? I want the churches to sing those songs. And CCLI became a big unlocker of that industry, because CCLI is all about tracking and unlocking permission for churches to be able to freely sing songs. So now in 2025, I see us, we're operating in a dual parallel track where at the same time, the same songs that we want to participate in and we want to sing on a Sunday morning, they're trying to put those songs into our cars and motorbikes and radios and all of that. There's the passive and the active, right? And so now it's kind of clashing, because in the middle of that, there are songs that are trying to be both. And then also what's happening is the passive is influencing the active. The passive experience of, I love how this song, it's so produced, it's so amazing, it's in a key that's 6 keys above what anybody can sing, but I still love it. But that leaks into the church, and then the church is like, I like this, but something's not right. Why is nobody singing? We're all just listening, right? So you could almost say that churches are becoming like the new radio stations of the worship music industry. And this is, unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of publishers like, how do I get my songs into those sanctuaries and get them heard by people so more people want to sing? And I'm not meaning to, diss any of this, because it's just the reality of life. And, I mean, business is reality in life, and I'm not afraid of that. But this is what happens: is people want their songs to be sung, and so when you show up on a Sunday morning, there is that wrestle of, is a worship pastor. This is what it comes down to: is a worship pastor having that very intentional mindset of, my primary goal is to get people to engage and sing and participate. Is that the end of the day thing that the worship pastor wants? And or is it that I need to sound like the radio cut? Like, that's what I want, is I want our band to sound amazing. And obviously they would say they want both, but what are they really doing? Like, what keys are they singing the song in? What arrangements are they following? That artist's level version of the song that's just not reachable by your average pew sitting person. And I'm getting kind of fired up now. You got me really into the zone of...
No, this is so good. I think what you're doing is you're pulling back the curtain a little bit on the Wizard of Oz kind of thing, and giving us a peek into a world that maybe some people just have never heard of. And, obviously, like, there's books out there like Jeremy Riddle's The Reset was a really great book that just kind of shed a light on a lot of stuff that most people, I spent 10 years in Nashville. I kind of know how the industry works as well. And there's some great-hearted people within that industry, but like you said, it is still an industry, just like, churches that, have to keep the lights on and pay the bills. I mean, that is technically a business, but it is also a kingdom business, right? I mean, it's if you're proclaiming the gospel and your main goal is to, live out that Great Commission, then you have the right heart and motivation, but that does not negate the fact that, you have to have a business license to operate and all that good stuff. And, I love what you said about, like, asking that question to a worship leader of, like, okay, well, what is your ultimate goal? Is it to lead your congregation in worshiping Jesus through songs that they can attain and they can sing and they can make their own? Or is it to sound like X, Y, and Z? What would you say, Ryan? I mean, dude, I just got to ask you, like, what would you say is the goal of a worship leader in your words? What would be your answer to that?
Well, I think I'll tell you what it can't be. It can't be that the worship leader's goal is to be the example of a perfect life, because that's way too much pressure to show up on a Sunday morning and be like, look at me and see how amazing of a life I have. Because I will tell you, I showed up on stage so many Sunday mornings and I felt like a wreck, and I was like eaten up and spit out the week before, and I still had to show up. So I just kind of wanted to say it can't be that. But kind of connected to that, when people see a brokenness, an authenticity, I don't know, there's some kind of, I think the it factor of a worship leader is somehow I can relate to that guy on stage. He's not performing. And if you can somehow convey that, and then you start breaking into people's hearts, right? And you make this connection from the song. Like, even I often will say to people, if you're singing a song that you didn't write, you need to sing it as though you wrote it. Like it's who cares who wrote it? Nobody cares who Matt Redman is and Chris Tomlin is on a Sunday morning. They don't even know Elevation or whatever. They just know this is a song, we're singing it. And so, And I'll just like say at the outset that I'm so imperfect at this because sometimes I'm not authentic, I'm not real, I'm just trying to get through a Sunday. But maybe even there's a sense of me knowing that somehow carries people can see that this guy isn't just all about the show on a Sunday morning. So that's what I would try to go after. And I mean, I love the elevation, the passion, the Tomlin, the Brandon Lake. I saw him in a stadium, and I'm like, holy cow! How could I be more like that amazing worship leader? But I'm also seeing a guy, even like a Brandon Lake, especially most recently with this song, hard fought Hallelujah. I see a guy like Brandon really pressing into the edges of like, guys, we got to get real on stage. And I lead worship regularly for a men's recovery center. They're all recovering from drugs and addiction. And when I sing Hard Fought Hallelujah in front of them, I'm like, oh, this song makes so much sense now because I see them singing back to me through their pain and struggle and anxiety and depression and then I try to like reflect that back to them in the story. I will tell them even as I'm leading worship, I'll be like, wow, guys, what are we singing here? This is so real. So I think that's what a worship leader's got to do is be a human being on stage.
That's such a good challenge for anybody listening that, authentic worship really comes down to, being real with yourself, with God, with others, with your congregation. I think that's a great piece of advice, Ryan. And dude, what a great conversation. I had no idea where this was going to go, and I think I've taken a trip down musical lane. I've gotten insight into worlds like classical music and of course music theory. And dude, just with our time remaining, dude, I would love to ask you a question that I have to ask everybody when we get to the end of our time on this podcast, and that is, man, what do you feel like the Holy Spirit has been speaking to you? What has just been maybe on repeat in your prayer life that you feel like the Lord is resonating in your heart recently?
In full confession, I knew this question was coming, and I thought about asking you not to ask me this question because I was too intimidated by it. So, but I did have something. I'll tell you,
this is where you get to be that authentic, just real and vulnerable.
I'm a pretty I like the simple truths, and the thought that came to me was love God and love people. There are so many theological things I don't understand or I have debatable views about or this and that, but at the end of the day, but this was one little twist I thought I would try out on you and see, maybe the Lord gave this to me, maybe he didn't. But what do you think of this? Is the phrase, love God by loving people. I just thought of that this morning, and I thought that feels kind of profound to me, because how do you love God? Do you raise your hands? Do you what he just says, just love people, and then as a byproduct you'll be loving me. So I feel like I could apply that to leading worship or putting on a cornhole tournament or kissing my grandkid, I mean, anything in between. It all makes sense there. So that's what I got. That's what the Lord is speaking to me about.
I love that, Ryan. And, to be honest, that there is a correlation between the two. I mean, I remember talking to Heather Zempel. She's a pastor and an author, and she's always kind of been a voice in my life. And she actually unpacked the Greek of that when Jesus taught that great commandment of, love the Lord your God, your with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. There is a relationship between loving God and loving people. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. Like, what a simple gospel that we live out and follow. And man, appreciate your heart, appreciate your time, appreciate PraiseCharts. What a phenomenal resource, and just grateful for you guys partnering with us this season and being our sponsor for the Worshipology podcast. And I know so many people find such value in what you guys put out week in and week out. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for being on Worshipology, Ryan.
Oh, this has been a real treat. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks. To connect or learn more, visit kurtisparks.com. This episode was brought to you by your friends at PraiseCharts.com. Whether you need simple chord charts, lead sheets, vocal arrangements, full orchestrations, or stems, we've got it all ready to download instantly. Plus, their affordable bundles and flexible formats save you time and money so you can focus on leading worship and not scrambling for resources. If you haven't checked them out yet, now is the time. Visit PraiseCharts.com and get everything you need for your worship team today.